Hey everyone, welcome to Things Lucy Reads. I'm Luce and this is my February reading wrap up. The first book that I finished was The Long Call by Ann Cleeves, which is the first in the Two Rivers series, which has recently been made into a TV show called The Long Call. Ann Cleeves is the author who wrote Vera and Shetland. If you're at all into British crime police dramas, you're probably familiar with those. The Long Call is the same kind of thing, except that the main character detective is gay and has a husband. So obviously I am much more interested in this series than any of the others. I don't really watch Vera, my parents watch it, and I've seen bits and pieces of it here and there, but Shetland was the one that I really got into, and early on in lockdown I pretty much just marathoned the whole thing. And the thing about Shetland is, in the TV show, the main character, Jimmy Perez, has a stepdaughter and a little bit of a contentious relationship with his stepdaughter's biological father. And I make jokes on Instagram all the time that Jimmy and Duncan would save themselves so much relationship drama if they just got together, because Jimmy's wife has died. Like at the beginning of the first season we learn that she has passed away, so like there's really nothing stopping them except compulsory heterosexuality. And personally I think that they should be together, and because they already share a child. In the last episode that I watched, which I think was the end of season 6, they were living together, so like just do the thing. Anyway, my point is, Shetland is depressingly straight. So I've been very excited for this same kind of thing, but actually gay. The entire first season of The Long Call has now been broadcast in Australia. I've still only seen the first episode, but I have read all of the novels that currently exist of this series because I just hyperfixated. Anyway, so I'm not going to go into too much in depth about the murders and the cases because they're always very complex. They always involve more than one death. I read the first one, which is called The Long Call, and then I read the second one, which is called The Heron's Cry. That one I had from my library. The Long Call I own an ebook copy of, and I also bought an ebook copy of the novella called The Girls on the Shore, which chronologically comes after The Heron's Cry, but I read it in between the two books. The two novels I gave 3.5 stars, and then the short story I gave 3 stars. I really like Matthew as a character. He's not completely satisfied with the relationship that he has with his husband. Not that it's bad or unhealthy, because it isn't, but Matthew is just very caught up on Jonathan being resentful that he puts his work first and that he draws a clear boundary between work and home life. And both of the cases in both of the novels crossed over heavily with Jonathan's workplace and Jonathan's friendship group. So there was a little bit of an aspect of a conflict of interest for both of them, and Matthew tried to keep the lines as clear as they possibly could be and spend a lot of time thinking about how probably Jonathan was resentful of Matthew working late, of Matthew telling him that he couldn't help out because it's a conflict of interest. But Jonathan has been presented already as a character that does not hold on to things at all. He just, like, even if they have an argument, Jonathan's fine about it the next day or even an hour later. Like, he doesn't hold grudges and he doesn't hold on to anger. So I just wish that they communicated more as a couple and that they just understood each other a little bit better. On Instagram I mentioned after reading The Heron's Cry that I think that the next book will be where the series really comes into its own, because we're starting to see the seeds of character development, and specifically at the very end of The Heron's Cry, everything that I was kind of seeing the characters slowly move towards throughout the two books kind of paid off, and it did sort of save the series for me, because if that hadn't been there, I sort of felt like it was stagnating. The characters weren't really going anywhere. And the other thing that really bugged me specifically about The Long Call was that Matthew was raised in an evangelical community, which is pretty much like a cult. Very rapidly lost his faith the first holidays he came home after university, and as a result of that was cast out from the community and pretty much disowned by his mother. And then he like went back to university and then just kind of experienced regular life, met Jonathan and got married. And look, here's the thing, it's the rep's not bad. The rep is very good, but it is very obvious that first she made the conscious choice to not address the trauma that Matthew surely has from being told his whole life that sodomy is a mortal sin, and then realizing that he's gay after being cast out for losing his faith. At no point did it mention when or where he figured out he was gay. It was just like, oh yes, I married a man. And like, I appreciate treating it exactly like a heterosexual relationship, and for the most part it worked really well, but the absence of even lip service to this realization just marked it out starkly as being inauthentic. I didn't really necessarily need like a blow by blow of the trauma that he went through coming to this realization and unlearning his internalized homophobia, because there's no way he didn't have that. But there was just absolutely nothing, and the admission of it was glaring, and I just felt a little bit unsatisfied. I mean, like, even if she just said, oh, by the time I finished university, I'd realized I was gay, and then I met Jonathan and got married. Like, even that would have been enough, but there was just nothing. So that, like, if that had been addressed, like, literally at all, then The Long Call would have been a 4-star for me, but it was only 3.5 because it was very obvious that this was missing. And I think that maybe Anne Cleeves realized very quickly that it was too far out of her lane, and so she decided to just not put it in at all. And I fully respect that, but it did weaken this character because, as I said, the admission of this realization was just a gaping hole that was very, very obvious to me as a queer reader. And then The Girls on the Shore was fine. It ultimately didn't really add anything in terms of character development to the series, but it tided me over until I was able to get The Heron's Cry from the library, and that was really all I needed it to do. So yeah. So I don't know when the third book is coming out, but probably when it does I will pick it up, because it's not a bad series. I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but I enjoy reading it and I enjoy Matthew as a character, and I just really enjoy that there is a series of this specific kind with a gay protagonist. Because okay, let's move on. The next book that I read is this little manga volume, which is called Animal Crossing Deserted Island Diary. And this is basically just an extended Animal Crossing meme. Like, if you're on any Animal Crossing meme pages, then you'll know that, like, it's a lot of people just very gently, very lovingly making fun of the game and the way that they themselves play it. And this is very much that kind of thing. So it follows 4 characters who go to this deserted island because they're sold this great vacation plan by Tom Nook, and then they get there and they realize they have to build the village themselves, and it's a little bit of a scam. And then the rest of the book, pretty much, they do whatever they want to do, and Tom Nook is on the side going, but you're not supposed to do it that way, but why are you doing this? Why are you wearing that? And it was just really funny. And then there is a game guide and a character guide in the second half of the book as well. But it was just really light, really funny. I gave it 4 stars. It's just a fun time, which was ultimately all I wanted from it. The next book that I finished was Kith and Kin by Marika Nijkamp, which is part of the Critical Role IP. And then this follows 2 characters from the first campaign, which was called Vox Machina, and that is Vax'ildan and Vex'ahlia. They are half-elven twins. They originally were raised by their human mother in this little village called Byrodin, and then they were taken away by their elven father to live with him and to be trained as elves. But because they're half-elves, they were severely looked down upon by everyone, including their own father. And their father loved their mother, did not really love them. And then they go to this other place and they take a job which seems like a simple heist, and then it turns out to be more complex than that. And they get separated and they end up on separate sides of that conflict. And it was just so fascinating to see just basically both sides of this like argument and to figure out what was actually going on underneath it. I mostly listened to this on audio. The audiobook is narrated by Robbie Daymond, who was in Exandria Unlimited and also Campaign 3. And then it was also narrated by Liam O'Brien, who plays Vax, and Laura Bailey, who plays Vex. And so whenever these two characters spoke, their actors narrated those lines, and then Robbie did the lines of every other character and also just the narration. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And then I did read the last part of it on paper just because that worked better for my brain. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm really, really excited for more Critical Role novels to come out, and I hope that they do some more, because this was just really, really great. And it leads directly into the Vox Machina Origins comic series. So at the end of this, they talk about going to the place where that comic story begins. So it was just a really nice bit of continuity. I haven't seen all of campaign 1. Even without that knowledge, even with just the knowledge that I had from the comic series, I was able to follow this no worries, because it is Vex and Vax's origin story. So if you want to get into Critical Role, or you've seen like campaign 2, or you're watching campaign 3, or you've seen Exandria Unlimited and you just want kind of like a jumping in point for campaign 1, this would be a good place to start. And then the comics are also really good as well. So highly, highly recommend it. I really, really enjoyed it. I just love Critical Role. And then the next book that I finished is This Scum Villain Self-Saving System by Mo Shang Tong Xu. I've probably butchered that, because this book is about this guy called Shen Yun. It's probably not how you pronounce that either. He is reading this novel called Prada Mortal Demon Way, and he's obsessed with it, but he also hates it. And it annoys him to the point where he dies of rage, and then he wakes up inside of the novel in the body of the villain of the novel. And there's this thing called the system, which kind of controls his experiences, and he has the opportunity to change the events of the novel up to a certain point. If he acts out of character for the villain, he gets penalized for it, and there's this certain kind of point, and if those points go to 0, then he dies in the novel, and then dies in real life because he's died in real life already. So he reaches a certain point and then is able to influence things a little more directly, and we go from there. And it was just so zany and so much fun. I just really, really enjoyed this. I know who the endgame couple is for this story, because I have a fandom Twitter account for the show The Untamed, and there's a lot of crossover because the author that wrote that book also wrote this book, also wrote the book that Heaven Official's Blessing is based on. So I have kind of, through osmosis, been spoiled a little bit for this story, but that was fine. I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm very excited to read on, and I'm also very excited to read the other books by this author as well. The next book that I read was another Critical Role one, and it is the comic Mighty Nein Origins Caleb Widogast. This is Liam's character from campaign 2. And I gave this one 4 stars as well. When I read the Jester comic, I said it was a little bit unsatisfying because it wasn't anything that we didn't already know. Very much the same deal with this one, except this one for me was satisfying, and I can't tell you what the difference is, and I'm thinking maybe I should reread the Jester comic now that I know better what to expect from it. Everything in here was covered at some point in the campaign, which is campaign 2, so I didn't necessarily learn anything new, but it just felt a little more fleshed out than what I'd heard from Caleb in the campaign. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars for this one. And then the next book that I read is a poetry collection, and it is Throat by Ellen Van Neerven, and Ellen is a non-binary Munanjali Yagumbe author, and this is a collection about life in Australia, specifically as an Indigenous Australian, as a queer Indigenous Australian, just about connection to country and to family, and about belonging and about finding your people. Probably my favorite poem in here was The First Black Queer in the World, which is very much about thinking you're the only one because you're not exposed to anyone who is like you, and then finding out that there are lots of other people like you and learning from them, and just feeling like you have a community and that you're not the first and you're not the trailblazer, and that people have already made a path for you to walk on. And I just felt that very deeply. Even it's about other things too, politics and the government and climate change, and I just feel like if you're Australian and you haven't read this yet, then you really need to get on that, because it was just a really valuable insight into being a queer Indigenous person, even though it didn't set out to be educational. Some books just are that as you're reading them anyway. But I just really thoroughly enjoyed this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and now I'm going to read everything that Ellen has ever written because I think that they're just incredible and I want to see inside their brain a little bit more. And then the last 2 books that I read, I'll talk about this one first. So this is Vigil by Angela Slatter. This is the first in an urban fantasy trilogy set in Brisbane. So there's humans, which are called normals, and then there's the weird, and they are like paranormal creatures, but not vampires and werewolves and things. There's like sirens, but mostly the paranormal things in here I think are based on Eastern European legends, or folklore is a better word. So it's a lot of different things. And then there's this one person, weird person, who's making wine from the tears of children, and in order to harvest those tears you have to kill them, so obviously it's illegal. And it kicks off with the main character Verity, who is half normal, half weird, and her father was a butcher of humans so that the weird could consume the meat. Not a very nice guy. Thankfully dead by the time the novel starts. Verity takes care of that and then is pretty much immediately thrown into another case involving the death of a siren, and it goes from there. It was really complex and there were a lot of threads to follow, but I actually followed along very easily, which is surprising considering that I started reading this book in October 2019 and I did not finish it until February 2022. And I've been reading it very slowly on and off since October, 2 and a bit years ago. So that's not a reflection on the book. It's not that the book is bad or that it's boring. It's just that a lot of things happened that made me put down the book, and when it came time to read something, instead of finishing this, I tended to pick up other things. Look, this was really, really good. There was a secondary character who was queer. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm excited to see where the series goes. And the last book that I read, I actually finished today, but I'm counting it as a February book, and that is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which I read as an audiobook, which is narrated by the author himself. And this book is basically just a very long letter to his son about growing up in America as a black person, and specifically in Baltimore, and how it was to grow up there and what his family was like. And then when he first learnt about like the realities of police brutality. And a running theme throughout the book is that the body of a black person is not sacrosanct in the same way that the body of a white person is sacrosanct. So there was this point where someone laid hands on his son without permission or good reason, and Ta-Nehisi said something, because why wouldn't you? That's your child. And the white person who had done it said to him, "I can have you arrested," as if Ta-Nehisi had no ownership of his own body and it was the place of this white person to take it. And she certainly had that ability as a white person and he a black person. And so that was a running theme in a lot of different contexts about the body of a black person and what can be done to it and how it is viewed by other people and by the state. I just think it's one of those books that's really, really important to read. It has a lot of value as a window into what it's like to live in America as a black person. And there was a lot of discussions of intergenerational trauma and also like generational differences. So like how old Ta-Nehisi was when he learned certain things, how old his son is going to be when he learns certain things, and like what action is going to be the point at which they realize with sudden clarity how the world actually is. But it was just really, really good. I gave it 5 stars. I will probably listen to it again in the future. I will definitely pick up the other things that Ta-Nehisi Coates has written, because I just enjoyed is the wrong word, but I really valued the reading experience. And I thought that this was a very good, very important book and everyone should read it. So Those are all the books that I read in the month of February. As always, if you've read any of them and you would like to let me know what you thought, feel free to do that down below. If you want to let me know that you were here but you don't have anything specifically to say, leave me some kind of beachy emoji. I will leave that up to you. Something that evokes the beach for you. Leave me that emoji. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now.